Good morning and welcome to another online Sunday school class with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. As always, we like to begin by reminding you that we here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church believe that Jesus is the Christ, that He is the Son of the living God who lived a perfect life and died a sacrificial death for your sins and for mine, and that if you will place your hope and trust in Jesus Christ as both Lord and Savior, that you will be saved. If you would like more information about what it means to make Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior, we would invite you to follow the link in our description that will take you to a gospel presentation, as well as how to respond to the gospel and how to connect with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. If you live in the Hardin County, Kentucky area, we would invite you to join us for worship at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. You can do that in person, or you can do that online through Facebook Live, and be sure to check on Facebook to make sure that we are having services in person. As we begin our study today, we are in session 8 of our study, and we're going to shift gears today. We're going to, this quarter of our Sunday school class, we are shifting from the book of Ezekiel to the book of Daniel. And so session 8 begins that shift, and we're going to be in Daniel chapter 1. Beginning in verse 8 and going through to verse 21. And the title for today's session is Integrity Established. So again, this is session 8. It is titled Integrity Established. And we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 21. And we are going to do like we often do in our videos and as we have our discussions, and we're going to start with a question. And when we ask questions during our video, this is what we want you to do. We want you to pause the video. And if you are watching this with your family or with your spouse, we would encourage you to pause the video and actually have a discussion. Talk about the questions that we're asking, and then just whenever you're ready, go ahead and hit play. Excuse me. And continue on in the study. If you're watching this by yourself, then we would still encourage you to pause the video and interact with us a little bit. Get a pen, get a paper, write down the questions, actually take some time to respond. Maybe this is a great way to kind of begin the note-taking process as we go through all of this. And then once again, just whenever you're ready, we want you to hit play again, and then we will continue on in our study. I want you to think about this. So we're talking about integrity, and I want you to think about commitments that you have made. And the questions, it asks a flurry of questions. I'm going to ask those really quick, but I really want to get to the last question. And it asks this, it says, what commitments are the most difficult to keep, and what makes keeping a commitment so challenging? And how does keeping our commitments define our integrity? And that's really the question I want you to think about. I want you to kind of think in the back of your head, and you don't really have to answer this one or write it down, but just which commitments do you make that often seem to be the most challenging? That they're the hardest ones for you to keep, and they're the ones that you're most easily tempted to give in on. And then why is it that way? And then when you think about those commitments and keeping your commitments, why is keeping commitments so important to our integrity? Why does it define our integrity? And so what we want you to do is pause the video, think about that, maybe discuss all three, kind of go through that chain of thought, but really spend some time on that last one. How does keeping our commitments define our integrity? And we'll see you back as soon as you are done discussing and writing that down. All right, I'm going to tell you right now, when it comes to me, the hardest commitments for me to keep are the ones, almost for lack of better words, the ones that I make to myself. And what I mean by that, it's the ones that I have to keep when either no one else knows about it or no one else is watching. One of my favorite videos that I've seen, and it's a video that's done. It's a psychological test, and what they did was they brought children in and they set them in a room and they put a plate with a marshmallow on it in front of them, and they told them this: you can have that marshmallow. You're welcome to take it. If you take it, you won't get in trouble. But if you leave that marshmallow alone until I get back, you can have 2 marshmallows. And then they record these children and how they react to it, and they leave them in the room for a lengthy period of time. It's probably only like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or actually probably a relatively short amount of time. But these kids have to stare at this marshmallow and decide whether they want the immediate gratification to eat the marshmallow right then, or whether they want to wait and get that 2 marshmallow thing, and then you see them kind of wrestle with it and all that. And I especially like, because one of the kids just immediately eats the marshmallow, like no hesitation whatsoever. But that's a really good kind of connection to integrity. Is a lot of times we start off with a commitment, we start off with a promise that we're going to do something, but then when everybody's gone and it's just us and the marshmallow, we discover that often it's very, very hard to keep that commitment. But when we do keep that commitment, it really speaks volumes about our integrity. The book goes on to say this. I wanted to read what it had. It said, the summary statement of this session is: believers can live with integrity when tempted by compromise. When we think about integrity, we think of words like honesty, uprightness, sincerity, trustworthiness, and virtue. But integrity grows deeper than just these words. Integrity means having strong values and living by them through every circumstance. Through the study of the book of Daniel, we are going to learn from a man who had integrity, who could withstand any challenge. So this is going to be a great opportunity for us. I want to encourage us as we get into this to be challenged to live with that level of integrity and to live with a desire to have an integrity that honors God. Let's get into our study. Let's get into the Word together. We're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 1, and we're going to start off by just reading one verse. We're going to read Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, and we're going to talk about what exactly is going on here and why this is happening. So Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, we read these words. It says, Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. So he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. So already we got to kind of go like, hold on a second, time out. What on earth is going on here? So what is happening here? Daniel lives, I believe it is a time after Ezekiel. So we are, they would have been contemporaries. They would have been maybe around the same times. Obviously Nebuchadnezzar, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah. So Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel all existed and was doing ministry and serving in the prophetic role around the same time, obviously during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel represents one of these young Jewish men, boys, teenagers, that was exiled from Israel and brought to Babylon for the purpose of serving in his court. He decided to take some of these men. These were for political reasons, for safety things, in order to kind of sway the way that the Israelites looked at Babylon. He took them with him, and he took them with the intention of training them up and using them in his court. And so he brings these men, these boys really, to Babylon. He says, okay, we're going to take these boys and we're going to teach them what it means to be a Babylonian. And we're going to have them eat what we eat and drink what we drink, and they are going to learn what we know. And then ultimately, for the purpose of, they're going to be used in my court. They're going to be advisors. They're going to be entertainers. They're going to be counsel. They're going to be servants, and all of these different ways. And we're going to take care of them. But first we have to kind of Babylonize them, if you will, for a little bit. And so he takes all these men and he puts them into, kind of a prison type scenario, in the sense that they can't leave, but he treats them very, very well. Well, there's a problem with all this, is that Jewish men, Jewish people, they were supposed to, according to the covenant, according to the relationship with the Lord, eat a certain table. They're supposed to eat a certain way. They weren't supposed to eat pig. They weren't supposed to eat animals if they were not prepared in a certain way. They weren't supposed to have shellfish. There's all of these things that they weren't supposed to do. They weren't supposed to eat any sort of meat or wine or anything that was offered to a pagan god. All of these things. And in Babylon, that didn't matter. And probably almost all the meat was sacrificed to some sort of pagan god. The wine probably too, all sorts of stuff. And so basically, anything that was coming on, specifically anything that was meat or drink or anything like that was coming into this place for these Jewish boys to eat was going to be unclean food. Either the food itself was unclean because it was pig or horse or maybe even shellfish or something like that, or because of the manner in which it was prepared was an unclean way that made it so that they weren't supposed to eat it. And Daniel knew this. He knew enough about what was going on in Babylon that if he ate what the king gave him, he would be defiling himself. He would be making himself unclean, that he would not be living up to the covenant that he, as a Jewish man, was covenanted to live up to. And so because of that, he is now stepping in to this situation and saying, I don't want to do this. And I'm going to ask if I cannot do that. I'm sure Daniel's like, I don't want to starve to death, but I don't want to eat this food because I know for a fact that if I eat this food, that I'm going to ultimately be sinning, or not necessarily sinning, but definitely defiling himself and not going to be able to have the right relationship with the Lord that I want to have. And so when we try to think about this, what we really begin to see just right off the bat from Daniel is he is making a decision that a lot of people are not making. This is when we start to really see the rubber meet the road and integrity really be tested. See, all of the other, young men that have come from Jerusalem or from Judea to Babylon, from Judah to Babylon, we don't hear about them having the same problem. You think about it. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, the only ones that choose to follow this is Daniel, and then the three other men that we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're the ones that say, hey, I don't want to eat this. This is against our customs. This is going to defile me. I don't want to eat this. Which means we have no idea how many actually came, but it would be safe to assume it was more than 5, maybe more than 10, maybe more than 30. In fact, there could have been even 100, dozens, if not 100, young men that had been brought in for this purpose. And out of all of these men, there are only 4 who stood up and said, no, we need to eat in the ways that we've agreed to in our covenant with our God. And so automatically we begin to see how their integrity is really rising to the top. Because in a place and a time where they could have just gone with the flow, they could have said, when in Rome, which I know we're way before that, but when we need to act like these people, this is how we're going to stay alive. They could have been very pragmatic about it. If we're going to live, we need to live like these people. We need to act like these people. Some of them may have stuck their nose up and said, well, what has God done for us? We're here now. We might as well make do with what we've been given, so on and so forth. But these men said, I've made a vow. I've said I will not defile myself, and I'm going to keep that vow. This leads to a question that I want you to pause the video and think about, and it's this. What is the value of a carefully thought out set of beliefs? What keeps people from establishing a set of beliefs that impact how he or she lives? So you think about it. These people understood, we talk about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel. These people knew what they believed, knew why they believed what they believed, and were willing to put that into practice, even if it meant being different. Why is that a good thing? Why is that valuable for us today? And why do you think so many people fail to do that and fail to have values and understand them well enough that they're willing to have an impact on their life? Take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll return to our study. All right. So that's a really heavy question. It's a question that I absolutely love. And I just want to say this about it is I think that one of the big reasons why people never develop a well thought out understanding of what they believe and why they believe it and allow that to impact their life is really quite simply in our culture today. And I'm not saying about anybody else in any other time, but in our culture today, I think one of the big reasons for that is that takes time and effort. It takes time, it takes effort, and it does take some sacrifice. And the reality is most people today are too distracted to really think out and put time into understanding what they believe, why they believe it, to a point that they're willing to stick to that and hold to that, even when there might be opportunities to go to do something against that belief. And I don't think this is by accident. I think we live in a culture that we are constantly distracted. We are bombarded by phones and videos. Our entertainment gets shorter and faster. It used to be that the only way you could watch, a moving picture, so to speak, was you had to go to a movie theater. And you would go in, and there'd be shorts, and there'd be cartoons, and there'd be news, and there'd be like a film that was still only a little bit over an hour. And that was the only way you could have any of that. Outside of that, you had radio. Just talking about 100 years ago. And then it went into our homes. And then what used to be movies, feature-length movies with all of the extra things, then became 30-minute shows or an hour-long shows. And then suddenly it got shorter. And then YouTube came in, and now we've got 20-minute shows, 15-minute shows. And now even today we have TikTok, and now people are watching 15-second little blurbs and just running through them as fast as they can. And that's what's that can be the only thing that can hold their attention. A lot of people, and I'm guilty of this myself sometimes, nothing can hold their attention long enough. And when we think about that, when we think about what it's asking here, to have a set of beliefs that we have established and that we understand the ins and outs of, to the point that they have an impact on our life and shape the way we make decisions, we're too distracted to get there. And it's a shame. And I think that's one of the reasons why. That's one of the things that keeps us from having that. And unfortunately, what that means is, because we never take the time to really have an established, understanding set of beliefs, because we don't have that, the world can just move us every which way. And we see the culture do that, unfortunately. And we see it in young people probably more than older people, but we see it across generations, where if we lean on people hard enough, we'll just watch them begin to just go lockstep with everybody else. But let's continue on in our study. Let's look what Daniel does. So if we remember from the verse that we just read, he has gone to the chief eunuch and asked for permission not to defile himself with this food that he's been given. Let's look at verses 9 and 10. As we do so, I want to encourage you to just kind of look at what God is doing in the midst of all this. It says, now God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and drink. What if he sees your face looking thinner than the other young men of your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So I want you to just kind of notice very quickly here how God is at work in this. This is an interesting statement, because it says not that Daniel's demeanor brought him favor with this eunuch, this person that was in charge of him, kind of his caretaker. It wasn't his charisma. It wasn't his wisdom. It wasn't any sort of special gifting at all. But rather, it was God. That God was working in a supernatural way through Daniel and through these other three as well, I'm sure, to bring favor with this eunuch, so that he would feel comfortable talking to him, that the eunuch would be willing to have a conversation with him, to the point that this request is not met with, be quiet and do what you're told, but I have sympathy for what you're saying, I have a lot of respect for you, but we have a problem. If I allow you not to eat all this food, these choice meats, and we're thinking, wine and maybe pork and all of this meat and fatty food and all this type of stuff, if I don't let you eat this, and then you start to look more thin and sickly, or just not as healthy and full as the rest of the men, they're going to think that I'm showing favorites and that I'm treating you poorly, and it could actually fall back on me and I could die. And so this really has an interesting thing, and the book says it this way. It says, God's hand was there establishing a favorable relationship between the chief eunuch and David. This is the first of many occasions where Daniel was equipped by God to address a challenging situation. And then the book makes this statement, and I want to know if you agree with this or disagree with this and why. And it says this: as believers, we should be able to explain the reasons for the hope living with us when people, even when we are asked to compromise. So that's a good question. Do you agree or disagree with that? For we as Christians, as believers, we should be able to make a defense, to explain why we do something or why we do something when we're being challenged for that. Do you agree or disagree? And at the end of all this, I want to know if maybe your opinion of that changes. Let's actually take just a couple minutes, pause the video, and ask that question. Do you agree or disagree with the statement that as believers, we should be able to explain our reasons for our holy living when we're asked about it, or when we're challenged to compromise it? Take a couple minutes, discuss that, and then we'll continue on in our study. All right, hopefully you said yes, we should. Now, I understand why you might say no. I understand that you might say, no, I shouldn't have to explain myself. That's kind of more, that's a little bit more in our culture today, I think, that would exist. Where it'd say, no, it's none of their business. If I say that my beliefs mean I don't want to do that, or I can't do that, then they should just accept that and they should have a problem with that. I get what you're saying there. And you might win an argument there. You might say, no, I'm not doing that, and it's none of your business why. And that may be good enough. But for us as believers who have been given the Great Commission and are called to not just be Christians, but to make Christians, to make disciples, I don't know if we can really say that we don't need to make a defense. I think it's far better for us when people say, hey, do you want to go do this thing with me? Whatever it is. I don't know. I don't want to think of an example right now. And we say, no, I don't want to. That's just not my thing. I'm not going to do that. Well, why not? Well, so... and say, well, I'm a follower of Jesus, and this is one of those things that because I'm a follower of Jesus, I don't do, and here are the reasons why. The Bible says this. The Bible says that I shouldn't participate in these type of things, that leads to temptation and sin, and I just don't want to go down that route. I don't want to have anything to do with that, and so I'm going to excuse myself from it and be able to just explain it. These are the things that are going to happen if I do something like that, and I just don't want that. I don't want that to be something that ultimately creates an addiction for me or causes me to fall into sin. I think that's a good thing, because that's going to get people thinking about, well, what do I believe? Well, why is it okay why would I say this is okay, but they say it's not? Well, does he make a good point? Is this going to make me think a certain way, or respond a certain way, or act a certain way that even I might say is unsavory or not a good thing? Those are good conversations to have, because they may ultimately become springboards into gospel conversations with people that desperately need to hear the gospel. Let's continue on. We're going to look at Daniel verses 11 through 16 now, so now we're going to finally get to a bigger chunk. And as we do so, I want you to listen closely to the test that is proposed by Daniel. And I think you probably know where this is going. But he says this: so Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he says this: please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. He agreed with them about this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating the king's food. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine and that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. Now, here's something that's very interesting about this. There's a couple things that I want to point out here, because I thought they were interesting from the text, and I think that they're things that we need to recognize. First off, there are people who are taking what we read here and trying to turn it into a diet. I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure you've kind of know that there are books out there where they're saying, well, listen, if you just eat fruits and vegetables and drink water for 10 days, then you're going to feel so much better and healthier and all that type of stuff. That's not the point of this passage at all. In fact, the reality is what first off, what they're proposing is give us just First off, he says, gives us just fruits and vegetables, but that word, vegetables, really means anything that can be grown. So the good news here is that does include grain. So there would have probably been bread involved in their food, but it couldn't have been bread made in an unhealthy way or an ungodly way. So they said we can have grain, we can have bread, we can have fruits, we can have vegetables. We're basically just not going to eat the meat that has specifically been sacrificed to idols or meat that's unclean for another reason. And instead of drinking the wine, we're just going to have water. That's what they're saying. Now, this is not, and what they're saying is, give us this, feed us in this way, and after 10 days, if we look more sickly than everyone else, then you can change it. Well, here's kind of a funny thing about this. 10 days is not going to make that big of a difference. If anybody here has ever tried to diet or tried to lose weight or tried to do anything like that, you know that if you only give yourself 10 days to have a visibly noticeable difference in your person, in your appearance, that's not enough time. It's just not. And so what they're proposing is, if we look worse, or if things don't look better, or there's any cause for concern, then you can make us just eat the king's food. The odds that not only they would eat this and have a noticeable difference, but also look more healthy and more fair and in better shape than the other 10 is not great. What is happening here is God is specifically intervening in this situation in a really fantastic, if not miraculous way, to strengthen and empower and be with these young men so that they look better than everyone else. Essentially, God is blessing them and blessing their health because of their faithfulness so that they can continue on in this. God is at work here. This is not just to praise a meatless diet. On the contrary, this is God intervening in the lives of people who are consciously choosing to be faithful over faithless. The book asks this question. I like the question. It says, how does a test of a person's faith strengthen their faith, and what results do you enjoy because of a tested faith? So take a couple of minutes to discuss that. If we understand what's happening here is not that fruits and vegetables and water is way better for you than eating meat and wine and all that stuff, and instead it is about God working and doing something, why is it, or how does the test of a person's faith strengthen their faith, and how do the results, and what results do we enjoy because of tested faith? Take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll continue on in our study. All right, hopefully you've come up with some good answers. I think just if anything, what we see is when our faith is tested and we see God show up, then that is something we're going to take with us, and so it's going to be easier. Those tests are going to be easier sometimes later, or as God begins to test us in bigger ways, we're going to be ready for it, and the benefits that come from that is just a deeper faith, and not only that, but a testimony that's going to encourage others on their faith as well. The book says this before we get on to the next passage, just related to what I said. It says, because David and his friends were in better shape than those who ate the king's food, they were allowed to continue on with their new diet. So let's see how all of this ends up for David and his three friends. Let's read verses 17 through 21. And it says this. It says, God gave these four young men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. At the end of the time that the king had said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among all of them, no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to attend the king, and every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted them about, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and mediums in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. It's pretty amazing to recognize that not only did God bless them with health and the physical things so that they could maintain this faithful decision that they made. But he also blessed them with the wisdom and the understanding and really these gifts of the Holy Spirit that would allow them to find favor with Nebuchadnezzar and do what was good. It's an interesting thing that God is blessing Nebuchadnezzar, what we see here, through his chosen people, through these things. And we see that God is clearly at work through all of this. This gives us a question that we ought to ask, which is this: how does trusting God lead to gaining understanding and wisdom? And I'm going to let you go ahead and have a discussion about that. Take a couple minutes, pause the video, and discuss that, and then we're going to discuss it as well. It is, how does trusting God lead to gaining understanding and wisdom? Discuss that, and we'll return and discuss it. All right, so how does trusting God lead to more wisdom and more understanding? And I think if we even look at the book of Proverbs, where we can kind of turn to get a lot of our wisdom and understanding and a lot of these wise sayings, we see in there that says, don't lean on your own understanding, but trust in the Lord. And that's what real wisdom is. And a lot of times when we don't put our trust in God, when we don't trust that God's promises are true and trust his word to do its best, what that means is we're trusting in our own understanding. And that can only take us so far. You know, when we trust in our own power, when we trust in our own understanding, when we trust in our own actions, activities, and thoughts, that can only take us so far. But when we begin to trust in the Lord and we begin to trust his word and what he says in the Bible, and we trust his character, and we step out, sometimes we step out and do crazy things or dangerous things or unusual things like we see these four young men doing for the sake of God. And because we're being obedient to him, we see God move and we see God show up in these ways that just allows it to grow beyond what we are able to understand. And ultimately, it's just what we see, that understanding and wisdom really do begin to grow, and we begin to see that what God has written in his word applies in even more ways than we could possibly imagine, and that is just a truly, truly amazing thing. This book says this: it says, Daniel was given the ability to understand dreams and visions, and in Babylon, a lot of times they believed that the gods spoke to them through their dreams, and prepared them for what was going to occur later. So what we see is a man who knows the Lord and worships Yahweh and Yahweh alone is better at interpreting dreams and understanding what is going on than even the magicians and the mediums and all of those people there that were supposed to be able to commune with the gods and commune with the underworld or whatever it is. And instead, it's these people who follow Yahweh are far better and far more equipped, and that's going to become a springboard for these men to explain that God, that Yahweh, the one true God, is actually the one true God. They're going to show, they're going to ultimately use this as a witness for who he is. It says this, it says, Daniel and his friends' testing prepared them for their life, the life that awaited them over the years to come. It is important to point out that this passage ends with this statement that Daniel remained with them until the first year of King Cyrus. King Cyrus, way later than Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, it shows that Daniel actually served in exile in this foreign land for 80 years. He came probably as a teenager, maybe even a young teenager, and remained there for 80 years, well into his 90s. He was given a long life of service and used by God in fantastic ways because of faithfulness that started as a young man. I want to close our time together with this question: how do the tests that God places in our lives prepare us for the future assignments from him? Take a couple minutes, discuss that, close your time with prayer, and then join us this week online only through Facebook Live. We are going to take a week off because not only of COVID in my house, but COVID in many other houses, and then we'll return in a week later. So join us online through Facebook Live for worship at 11 o'clock. Remember, our last question is, how do the tests that God places in our lives prepare us for future assignments for him? Take that, discuss it, pray, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. God bless.